There is a moment tonight when you will be completely alone with yourself. No one will be watching you. No one will be asking you to be strong. No one will need you to explain what you are feeling. The messages will stop. The noise will disappear. The room will become quiet, and for a few minutes before sleep takes you, there will be nothing left between you and your own mind. That moment may be more important than you realize, because during the day, you can distract yourself from almost anything. You can work, you can scroll, you can talk, you can laugh, you can stay busy, you can tell yourself that you are fine. But when the lights go out and the world becomes silent, something changes. The version of you that performs for the world begins to disappear, and another part of you begins to rise to the surface. The thoughts you avoided during the day, the emotion you never had time to feel. The memory you thought you had forgotten, the person you cannot stop thinking about, the fear you keep pretending does not exist. The strange feeling that your life is moving forward while something inside you is still standing in the same place. You may call it overthinking, you may call it loneliness, you may call it stress. But Carl Jung would have asked a deeper question. What if your mind is not disturbing your sleep? What if it is finally trying to tell you something? Jung spent much of his life exploring the hidden layers of the human psyche, the parts of ourselves that remain outside ordinary awareness. And one of his central ideas was that what remains unconscious does not simply disappear. It continues influencing us, quietly, repeatedly, sometimes through emotions, sometimes through dreams, sometimes through patterns we keep repeating without understanding why, and sometimes through the thoughts that arrive only when the world becomes quiet. So tonight, before you sleep, I want you to do something different. Do not immediately reach for your phone. Do not immediately try to force yourself to feel positive. Do not immediately push away the thoughts that make you uncomfortable. Instead, for a few minutes, simply become curious, because there may be something inside you that has been trying to get your attention for a very long time. And the strange thing is, the quieter you become, the easier it may be to hear. So stay with me until the end, because the final idea may change the way you understand not only your nights, but the person you are becoming every morning. During the day, you are constantly editing yourself. You decide what to say, what not to say, what emotion is acceptable, what emotion should be hidden, how you should behave, how you should appear. You may be tired, but you smile. You may be hurt, but you say, "I'm okay." You may be angry, but you stay polite. You may want someone to reach out, but you tell yourself you do not care. You may feel lost, but you continue acting as if you know exactly where you are going. This is part of being human. We need a certain amount of control to function in the world. Jung used the idea of the persona to describe the social face we develop, the version of ourselves we present to other people. Your persona is not necessarily fake. It is simply incomplete. It is the part of you that knows how to function in society. The professional you, the responsible you, the strong you, the funny you, the calm you, the person everyone can depend on. But there is a problem when you begin believing that the persona is the entire person, because everything that does not fit that image has to go somewhere. And this is where nighttime becomes interesting. During the day, there is always another task, another conversation, another notification, another problem, another reason not to look inward. But eventually the day ends. You put your phone down. You turn off the light. And suddenly there is nowhere else to go. You are lying there in silence. And a thought appears. Maybe it is about someone. Maybe it is about your future. Maybe it is about something that happened years ago. Maybe you cannot even explain what it is. You simply feel something. A heaviness, a restlessness, a strange emptiness, a feeling that something in your life is not aligned. And this is where most people make the same mistake. They immediately try to get rid of the feeling. They grab their phone, they watch another video, they check social media, they replay conversations, they think about tomorrow, anything to avoid being alone with that uncomfortable sensation. But what if the feeling is not your enemy? What if it is information? Imagine standing beside a lake during the day. The wind is strong, the surface is moving constantly. You can see the waves, but you cannot see very far beneath them. Then night comes, the wind becomes still, the surface settles, and suddenly you can see deeper. The water did not suddenly become deeper. You simply became quiet enough to notice what was already there. Your mind can be like that lake. During the day, everything is moving. At night, the surface becomes quieter. And what you discover underneath may not always be pleasant. But unpleasant does not mean meaningless. Sometimes the thought that makes you uncomfortable is exactly the thought you have been avoiding. Sometimes the sadness you feel at night is not caused by the night. Sometimes the night simply gives the sadness enough silence to be noticed. So tonight, instead of asking, "How do I stop thinking?" ask, "What is my mind trying to show me?" Do not judge the answer. Do not immediately solve it. Just notice. Because awareness is often the first step toward change. Think about the last few nights of your life. Not the events, the emotional state. How did you actually feel before you closed your eyes? Were you peaceful, anxious, lonely, angry, excited, exhausted? Were you thinking about someone who is no longer part of your life? Were you worrying about money, your relationship, your future, your appearance, your work? Or were you simply lying there with a feeling that you were somehow falling behind? Most people treat bedtime as the end of the day, but psychologically, it can also be a transition. You are carrying something from today into tomorrow. And that something is not always a conscious thought. Sometimes it is an emotional atmosphere. You may forget the exact sentence you were thinking before sleep, but you may wake up with the emotional residue of it. Have you ever opened your eyes in the morning and immediately felt heavy? Nothing has happened yet. Nobody has upset you. The day has barely started, and still something inside you feels wrong. Then there are other mornings when nothing is particularly different, but you wake up with a strange sense of space. You breathe more easily. You feel less defensive. You are not suddenly living a perfect life, but something inside you feels different. This is why the final emotional state of the day deserves attention. Not because you can magically control your subconscious, not because you can simply think one positive thought and transform your entire life, but because repeated emotional patterns matter. If every night you tell yourself, "I am behind. I am not enough. Something bad is going to happen. They do not really love me." Or, "I will never change. I have to do everything alone." Those thoughts do not become harmless simply because you fall asleep afterward. They become part of the mental environment you repeatedly inhabit. And the opposite is also true. If you end the day with acceptance, with gratitude, with honesty, with a sense that you survived something difficult, with the willingness to let tomorrow be tomorrow, you create a different internal atmosphere. This does not mean pretending everything is good. In fact, Jung's approach was almost the opposite of forced positivity. You do not need to lie to yourself. If you are hurt, acknowledge that you are hurt. If you are afraid, acknowledge that you are afraid. If you miss someone, acknowledge that you miss them. If you feel lost, you can admit, "I do not know what comes next." There is enormous psychological power in that sentence. Because the moment you stop fighting reality, you stop wasting energy pretending that reality is different. So tonight, before sleeping, ask yourself one simple question. What am I carrying into tomorrow? Not, what should I be feeling? Not, what would a strong person feel? Just, what am I actually carrying? Maybe the answer is sadness, maybe relief, maybe anger, maybe hope, maybe nothing clear at all. That's okay. You do not have to change the feeling. You only have to become conscious of it, because what you can see, you can begin to relate to differently, and what remains completely unconscious can continue repeating itself without asking for permission. Now we go deeper, because sometimes nighttime does not bring peace. Sometimes it brings darkness, and not the darkness outside your window. The darkness inside your own psychology, the thoughts you do not want to admit, the jealousy, the resentment, the insecurity, the need for attention, the fear of rejection, the desire to be loved, the anger you pretend you no longer feel, the part of you that wants revenge, the part of you that still wants someone who hurt you, the part of you that compares yourself to everyone else. These are the parts many people spend their lives trying to hide. Jung called this territory the shadow. The shadow is not simply the evil side of you. It is much more complicated. It can contain qualities, emotions, desires, and impulses that your conscious identity has rejected, suppressed, or refused to acknowledge. Imagine someone who has built their identity around being kind. They help everyone, they never complain, they always forgive, they always say yes. But secretly, they are exhausted, they are angry, they feel taken for granted. Yet they cannot admit the anger because it conflicts with their identity, so they push it down. During the day, they continue being the good person. At night, however, the anger may return, not necessarily as a clear thought, maybe as irritation, maybe as restlessness, maybe as a fantasy about finally telling everyone what they really think. The shadow has not appeared because the person suddenly became bad. It was already there. The silence simply removed some of the distractions that kept it hidden. This is why you should be careful when you say, "I don't understand why I keep reacting this way." Sometimes there is a part of you that understands perfectly. You simply have not listened to it. Maybe you keep choosing emotionally unavailable people. Maybe you keep sabotaging relationships when they become serious. Maybe you constantly need reassurance. Maybe you become defensive whenever someone criticizes you. Maybe you pretend not to care about recognition while secretly craving it. Maybe you repeatedly abandon your own needs to keep other people happy. And you keep asking, "Why do I do this?" Jung's perspective invites another question. What part of myself am I refusing to see? That question is uncomfortable, but it can be liberating, because the goal is not to destroy your shadow. The goal is to become conscious of it. Imagine a room in your house that you never enter. You keep the door locked. You know there is something inside, but you never look. Eventually, you start hearing noises from that room. Instead of opening the door, you turn up the music. The noise gets louder. You become more afraid. You tell yourself the room is dangerous. But perhaps the real problem is not what is inside the room. Perhaps the real problem is that you have never been willing to turn on the light. Your unconscious can be like that room, and nighttime can sometimes bring you close to the door. So if an uncomfortable thought appears tonight, do not immediately conclude, "Something is wrong with me." Instead, ask, "Why does this thought have so much emotional energy? What is it protecting? What is it asking for? What have I been pretending not to need? What am I afraid people would discover about me? And most importantly, what if this part of me does not need punishment? What if it needs understanding? Because the more you reject a part of yourself, the more power it can gain from outside your awareness. You do not have to act on every thought. Awareness is not permission. You can acknowledge anger without becoming cruel. You can acknowledge jealousy without acting destructively. You can acknowledge fear without obeying it. You can acknowledge your need for love without becoming dependent on someone. You can acknowledge your shadow without becoming your shadow. The goal is consciousness, and sometimes consciousness begins with simply saying, "Yes, this is also inside me." That sentence can be incredibly powerful, because when you stop pretending that you are only the parts you like, you become more whole. Now ask yourself something even deeper. When you close your eyes at night, what version of yourself appears? Not physically, emotionally. What is your inner picture of yourself? Are you someone who is always struggling? Someone who is behind? Someone who has to prove themselves? Someone who must earn love? Someone who cannot trust anyone? Someone who has already missed their chance? Someone who is always waiting for life to begin? Or are you someone who feels capable of moving forward, even without knowing exactly where the road leads? This matters because the unconscious does not operate only through words. It also works through images, symbols, feelings, and patterns. You can tell yourself all day, "I am confident." But if the deeper image you carry is, "I am someone who is never enough," your behavior may continue reflecting the deeper belief. Think about a person who constantly says they want a healthy relationship, but deep inside, they imagine themselves as someone who is always abandoned. So when someone gets close, they become suspicious. When someone becomes distant, they panic. When someone loves them, they wonder when it will disappear. They are not simply reacting to the present, they are reacting through an old inner image, and that image may have been built long before the current relationship. This is why psychological change is sometimes so difficult. You can change your behavior temporarily, but if your inner identity remains unchanged, you may eventually return to familiar patterns. Imagine an old photograph underneath a transparent sheet. Every new experience is placed on top, but the old photograph still influences what you see. That is how an unconscious self-image can work. You meet someone new, but you see them through the image. You get a new opportunity, but you interpret it through the image. Someone compliments you, you dismiss it. Someone criticizes you, you believe it immediately. Why? Because the experience is passing through an existing psychological template. So tonight, instead of trying to imagine some perfect future version of yourself, ask something more honest. What image of myself have I been carrying? Maybe you see yourself as exhausted, maybe as invisible, maybe as someone who always has to fight, maybe as someone who has to keep everyone happy, maybe as someone who is never chosen, maybe as someone who must stay in control because if you relax, everything will fall apart. Do not force the image away. Look at it, because sometimes the first step toward changing an inner image is recognizing that you have one. And then ask, is this really who I am? Or is this who I learn to become? That distinction can change everything. You may discover that what you call your personality is partly a collection of adaptations. You learn to be quiet because being heard felt dangerous. You learn to be independent because depending on people disappointed you. You learn to be funny because seriousness made you uncomfortable. You learn to be strong because weakness was never welcomed. You learn to expect rejection because expecting it felt safer than being surprised by it. These patterns may have protected you once, but something that protected you in the past can become a prison in the present. And this is where becoming conscious matters, because you cannot change an identity you cannot see. Now, this may be the most important part, because once people discover psychology, they often make another mistake. They start trying to fix themselves constantly. They analyze every feeling, they interpret every dream, they question every thought, they search for the reason behind every emotion, and suddenly even bedtime becomes another assignment. Am I healing correctly? Am I thinking correctly? Am I becoming my authentic self? Did I process my emotions today? Why am I still anxious? And the mind becomes exhausted from trying to become peaceful. But what if you did nothing tonight? What if you simply stopped? No performance, no self-improvement project, no attempt to become a different person, just awareness. Place your hand on your chest, feel yourself breathing, notice the weight of your body, let the day be finished. You do not need to solve tomorrow tonight. You do not need to solve your entire childhood. You do not need to understand every relationship you have ever had. You do not need to figure out your purpose before morning. You simply need to become present enough to notice. This is where I am right now. Maybe you are tired. Let yourself be tired. Maybe you are sad. Let yourself be sad. Maybe you are hopeful. Let yourself be hopeful. Maybe you feel nothing. Let that be true too. There is something powerful about allowing your inner world to exist without immediately trying to control it, because control and consciousness are not the same thing. Control says, I need to make this feeling disappear. Consciousness says, I am willing to see this feeling. Control fights. Consciousness observes. Control demands certainty. Consciousness allows mystery. And perhaps this is one reason the moments before sleep can become so psychologically meaningful. You are temporarily stepping away from the demands of the external world. You are no longer performing your role. You are simply a human being lying in the dark. And there, underneath all the identities, something much quieter may become visible. Not a perfect version of you, not a permanently healed version, just you. Now I want you to imagine something. Imagine that every night, before sleep, your mind gives you a small message, not a dramatic voice, not a supernatural sign, just a recurring feeling. Perhaps, I am tired. Or, I miss something. Or, this relationship does not feel right. Or, I am afraid of what happens next. Or, I don't actually want the life I keep telling everyone I want. Or, perhaps, I have been pretending for too long. What if you listened? Not blindly, not literally, but psychologically. What if you became curious about the repetition? Because repetition is often worth examining. The same type of relationship, the same emotional reaction, the same fear, the same self-doubt, the same kind of person, the same argument, the same loneliness, the same feeling at the end of the day. At some point, you have to stop asking, why does this keep happening to me? And start asking, what role am I unconsciously playing in this pattern? That question does not mean blaming yourself. It means reclaiming your psychological power. Because if everything is always someone else's fault, you have no ability to change anything. But if you can discover your own pattern, even partially, you have somewhere to begin. Perhaps you are not attracting the wrong people because you are cursed. Perhaps you are repeatedly choosing what feels familiar. Perhaps you are not incapable of being loved. Perhaps being loved makes you vulnerable, and vulnerability scares you. Perhaps you are not naturally anxious. Perhaps your mind learned that constant anticipation was a way to protect you. Perhaps you are not cold. Perhaps you learned that emotional distance was safer. These possibilities do not excuse harmful behavior, they explain it. And explanation creates the possibility of conscious choice. That is the difference between unconscious repetition and psychological growth. So what should you actually do tonight? Keep it simple. Do not turn this into another complicated ritual. Before you sleep, put your phone away for a few minutes. Sit or lie comfortably, take a slow breath, and ask yourself 4 questions. What am I feeling right now? Do not choose the answer you think you should have. Choose the honest one. What have I been avoiding today? Maybe a conversation, maybe an emotion, maybe a decision, maybe a truth about yourself. What image of myself am I carrying into tomorrow? Are you carrying the image of someone defeated, someone pressured, someone hopeful, someone alone, someone capable? And finally, what would change if I stopped fighting myself? Do not force an answer. Let the question remain open, because sometimes a question can work on the mind more deeply than an answer. Then breathe and let the day end. You don't have to become someone new tonight. You simply have to stop abandoning yourself. People often imagine transformation as something dramatic, a major decision, a new relationship, a new career, a sudden realization, a perfect morning routine, a moment when everything finally makes sense. But psychological transformation is often much quieter. It may look like noticing your reaction before you act. It may look like recognizing an old pattern while it is happening. It may look like realizing that you are angry instead of pretending you are fine. It may look like saying no without explaining yourself for 20 minutes. It may look like allowing someone to love you without immediately preparing for them to leave. It may look like resting without feeling guilty. It may look like waking up and realizing, I do not have to repeat yesterday. Or, that is change, not becoming a completely different human being, but becoming conscious enough that the old patterns no longer control every decision. Jung's idea of individuation was deeply connected with becoming more fully oneself, not becoming perfect, not becoming socially impressive, not becoming whatever other people expect, but integrating the different parts of your personality so you are no longer divided against yourself, and that process takes time. It is not a single breakthrough. It is a relationship with yourself. Night after night, choice after choice, moment after moment, Sometimes you move forward, sometimes you repeat an old pattern, sometimes you understand yourself, sometimes you don't. That does not mean the journey has failed. It means you are human. When you wake up tomorrow, do not immediately reach for your phone. Stay still for a few seconds. Notice the first emotional tone of the morning, not the story, the feeling. What is there? Peace, pressure, fear, sadness, energy, resistance, curiosity. You don't need to judge it. Just notice. Then ask, what did I carry into this morning? Maybe you will discover nothing. That's okay. Maybe you will notice something you have felt repeatedly. If so, become curious. Because the goal is not to control every thought you have. The goal is to develop a relationship with your inner world. To stop treating every uncomfortable emotion as an emergency. To stop believing every thought. To stop running from every silence. To stop confusing your social identity with your entire self. And slowly, you begin to hear yourself differently. Perhaps the deepest lesson is not that you should think about one magical thought before sleeping. There is no magic sentence that can instantly transform your life. The deeper lesson is this. Pay attention to who you become when nobody is watching, because that person deserves your attention too. During the day, you may be a parent, a partner, a worker, a friend, a leader, a helper, a responsible person, a strong person, but at night when all those roles become quiet, you meet the person underneath them. And perhaps that person has been waiting for you to stop running, waiting for you to stop judging, waiting for you to stop pretending that everything is fine, waiting for you to finally ask, what is really happening inside me? That question can be the beginning of a different life, not because the question magically changes reality, but because awareness changes your relationship with reality. Once you recognize a shadow, you can stop being completely controlled by it. Once you recognize an old identity, you can begin questioning whether it still belongs to you. Once you become honest about your emotional state, you no longer have to carry it blindly into tomorrow. And once you stop fighting yourself, something inside you becomes quieter. Not empty, not numb, quiet. And in that quiet, you may discover something you have been searching for everywhere else. Yourself. So tonight, when the room becomes dark, when the phone is finally silent, when nobody needs anything from you, do not be afraid of that moment. Do not immediately escape it. Stay there for a little while. Listen. Notice what appears. Maybe there is sadness. Maybe there is fear. Maybe there is anger. Maybe there is longing. Maybe there is a dream you abandoned. Maybe there is a part of you that is exhausted from being strong. Maybe there is a version of yourself you have been trying to become for everyone else. And maybe, underneath all of it, there is simply a quiet voice saying, come back to yourself. You don't have to answer tonight. You don't have to solve everything. Just listen. Because the mind often speaks most honestly when the world becomes quiet. And perhaps the greatest change does not begin when you wake up and decide to become someone new. Perhaps it begins the night before, when you finally stop running from who you already are. If this message made you recognize something inside yourself, leave a comment with one word that describes what you are carrying into tonight. You don't need to explain everything, just one honest word. And if someone in your life has been struggling silently with their own thoughts at night, share this with them. Sometimes a person does not need another person to fix them. Sometimes they simply need someone to remind them that what they are feeling deserves to be seen. And if you want to continue exploring the unconscious mind, human behavior, self-awareness, relationships, and the deeper psychological ideas inspired by Carl Jung, subscribe and stay with us. Because there are parts of ourselves we spend years trying to understand. And sometimes, the journey begins with something as simple as becoming quiet before sleep. So tonight, before you close your eyes, remember this. You do not have to solve your whole life before you sleep. You only have to be honest enough to hear yourself. And when you begin listening to yourself, you may discover that the mind you were trying to silence was actually trying to lead you home.